If you are still seeking awakening, it is because you have never stayed long enough with your own soul. The ego's greatest fear is not pain, it is the moment when you finally feel the soul without distraction. To listen to Rumi is to stop now and let everything you use for protection fall away. It is to remain there doing nothing but feeling, because the meeting with the soul does not happen when you understand. It happens when you stop resisting. The practice is simple and brutal. You listen and you stay. You stay when the mind screams, you stay when the chest tightens, you stay when the urge to leave appears, because that impulse to flee is the ego losing its footing. Stay until the end and you will learn in practice how to leave the mind, descend into the heart, and recognize your soul in the now, without complicated techniques, without effort, and without escape, because every part of this video deepens that meeting, and something essential reveals itself only when you remain. Do not try to improve the experience, do not try to feel something beautiful. Simply allow the words to pass through you as an old pain passes that was never fully felt. Bring attention to the body, to the chest, to the weight of the breath moving in and out, and let the heart feel before the mind explains. If sadness comes, do not distract yourself. If emptiness comes, do not fill it. If silence comes, do not break it. This remaining is the entire practice. This is how the soul appears, when you do not run, when you do not distract yourself, when you create no spiritual persona at all. Rumi speaks directly to that forgotten place in you. And when you listen without defense, something begins to open like an ancient memory, a simple truth that needs no name. The ego lives on noise, the soul lives on presence. And every second you remain feeling without control weakens the first and strengthens the second. The deep meeting is not a mystical event, it is this moment when you see yourself without a mask and realize you were never broken, only distant from yourself. If now something in you feels relief mixed with fear, it is because you are close, and the question that keeps pulsing, without a ready answer, is this: will you continue to run from this meeting, or will you stay here long enough to remember who you are? Now I speak to you directly, without detour. The soul appears only when you stop hiding from yourself, and the practice begins the instant you accept feeling what is here now, even if it is confusing, heavy, or without form, because the soul does not ask that you be well, it asks that you be whole. Close the outer world a little and bring attention into the chest, not to search for something mystical, but to recognize the soul as this raw feeling that perceives before words, as a silent presence that observes everything without hurry, without judgment, without demand. When you feel tightness, a knot, or emptiness, do not try to fix it. Let the soul touch it the way one places a hand over an old wound without trying to tear it open, because the deep meeting begins when you stop treating your pain as an enemy. Now, do something simple. Be still inside, even if the body moves. Be still in intention, because the soul likes this space where nothing is pushed away, where everything can exist without being explained. You will notice thoughts arising saying this is not enough, that something is missing, and those thoughts are the fear of facing the naked soul. So the practice is to hear and not follow, to return to feeling, return to the chest, return to the now. Feel how the breath touches the body from within, and notice that the soul reveals itself in this simple, natural movement that happens without your command, showing that there is something alive in you beyond the mind's control. When you allow this contact, the soul begins to expand like a larger inner space, and you realize you were always tight because you lived curled inside ideas about yourself. Now observe emotions passing like waves and recognize that the soul is the ocean that remains while everything moves, and this recognition changes everything without effort. If the urge to cry comes, hold less. If the urge to close the chest comes, soften a little, because the soul approaches when you reduce resistance, not when you force openness. Rumi spoke of remembering because the soul was never lost. What was lost was your attention, and now you begin to remember when you choose to remain present even without immediate reward. Bring attention to the weight of the body and feel how the soul likes concrete reality, ground simple truth, not spiritual discourses that pull you away from feeling. Now say inwardly, with quiet firmness, I will not run from myself now, and feel how the soul responds with a sense of alignment, even if subtle. When silence appears between thoughts, recognize the soul there as a stable ground, as something that does not need to be maintained, only recognized. You may feel afraid of disappearing, but the soul does not disappear. It sustains. What fears is the image you created to protect yourself from feeling. Remain sensing this nameless inner space, because the soul needs no definition. It shows itself as a living presence that holds everything. Now observe how time changes when the soul is present, how there is less urgency, less rushing, less need to arrive anywhere. The practice is to return again and again to this contact, even in the midst of chaos, even in the middle of the day, because the soul does not demand isolation, it demands honesty. When you feel irritation, sadness, or fatigue, bring it to the chest and allow the soul to receive it without rejection, because everything that is received transforms. Rumi became an authority because he lived this meeting to the end, and you touch the same ground when you choose to feel instead of distract yourself. Now notice how the soul begins to take up more space when you do not try to be someone, when you do not try to improve yourself, when you simply are. Each return to feeling strengthens intimacy with the soul and weakens the old habit of abandoning yourself in order to survive. Remain here, without concluding, without closing, because the deep meeting with the soul is not a final point. It is a state that deepens the more you choose not to run, and something in you continues to call softly to go even deeper into this living contact that has just begun. Now stay with me and do something honest. Place your hand on your chest and feel the soul as a living presence, not as a beautiful idea, but as this sensing that perceives before you think, because the soul begins to speak when you stop explaining yourself and allow yourself to feel without defense. Breathe deeply and slowly, not to relax, but to make space, because the soul needs space to emerge, and each conscious breath creates an interval where the noise falls away and what is essential appears. If tension arises, do not push it away. Move closer to it with attention, like someone listening to a difficult truth, because the soul reveals itself when you approach what you have always avoided. Now notice the weight of the body resting where it is and perceive how the soul likes ground, reality, contact with the now, not escape into thoughts about yesterday or tomorrow. When thoughts arise trying to define what you feel, return to raw sensation, because the soul communicates through direct feeling, not through well-formed sentences. Allow emotions to appear without naming them, because the soul expresses itself in waves that need passage, not interpretation. If emptiness comes, stay inside it, because this emptiness is fertile space where the soul breathes after a long time compressed. Now say inwardly, with calm firmness, I stay, and feel how the soul responds with a presence that sustains, even when everything seems unstable. Observe the silence that arises between thoughts and recognize the soul there as a stable ground, always present even when you get distracted. Bring attention to the natural rhythm of the breath and notice that the soul moves with this simple rhythm, teaching that living does not require constant effort. When fear appears, treat it as a sign of closeness, because the soul begins where control ends. Remain feeling the chest expand and contract, and notice that the soul likes this living movement without rigidity, without control. Now soften the face, the jaw, the shoulders, and feel how the soul settles when the body stops resisting. If the mind says this is too little, continue, because the soul reveals itself in the simplicity the ego despises. Observe how time seems to change when you remain, and within this new rhythm the soul finds space to manifest. Bring whatever emotion is present to the center of the chest and let the soul receive it without judgment, because receiving transforms. Now feel the contact of the feet with the ground and recognize the soul as something embodied, alive in the body, not distant. Allow yourself to feel silent gratitude for this intimate contact, because the soul responds to immediate recognition. If the urge to cry comes, let it, because the soul cleanses itself when it finds permission. Now return to inner silence and notice that the soul does not ask for conclusion, only for continuity of this being present. Feel how something in you aligns when the soul occupies the center, bringing a steady calm, not numb, but alive. When thoughts try to pull you outward, return to the feeling in the chest, because the soul always calls you back. Observe how the breath deepens on its own when the soul takes space, without you commanding it. Now say inwardly, I listen, and perceive the soul's response as clear presence. Remain in this contact without expectation, because the soul reveals itself when it is not demanded. If confusion arises, stay, because the soul passes through confusion without getting lost. Feel the whole body as a field of perception and recognize the soul permeating everything. When silence deepens, trust it, because the soul speaks more clearly when you do not interrupt. Now rest in this simple living state where the soul does not need to prove anything. Observe how urgency diminishes when the soul is present, creating inner space. If the impulse to flee arises, stay a little longer, because the soul appears right after this impulse. Feel the stability that is born when you remain and recognize this as a sign of real meeting. Now bring attention back to the chest and notice the soul pulsing as continuous presence. Allow this contact to extend effortlessly, because the soul sustains itself. When thoughts return, thank them and return to feeling, strengthening intimacy with the soul. Observe how the body responds with greater softness when the soul is recognized. Now remain in this nameless contact, because the soul is not defined, it is lived. Feel the profound simplicity of this state and trust it, because this is where the meeting deepens. Remain, breathe, feel, because the soul continues to reveal itself as long as you choose not to run. And as you stay, something in you knows that this meeting does not end, it only expands, calling you into an even more intimate immersion now, in this exact moment. Now stay with me and do something radically simple. Stop looking for the soul as something distant, and feel the soul as this immediate sensing that perceives before a word arises, because the soul does not live in thought. It pulses in the now, and the meeting begins when you accept feeling without postponing. Bring your attention back to the chest again, but this time without any expectation at all, like sitting beside someone you love in silence, because the soul reveals itself when it is not pressured to appear, when it is simply welcomed. If you feel heaviness, sadness, or a strange sensation, do not try to improve it. Allow the soul to pass through it the way it moves through a dark room by slowly turning on a light, without haste, without force. Now perceive the entire body breathing, not only the lungs but the abdomen, the chest, the shoulders, and recognize that the soul manifests when the body is no longer ignored. When thoughts arise trying to analyze the experience, notice them and return to feeling, because the soul hides every time you try to explain it instead of living it. Bring attention to the inner rhythm and notice how the soul likes steadiness, not forced intensity, and how each second of remaining creates real intimacy with yourself. If anxiety appears, do not get up, do not change anything. Just feel how the soul sustains even when the mind loses its footing, because the soul does not panic. Now say inwardly without sound, I allow myself to feel, and observe how the soul responds by opening space where there was contraction before. Observe the silence between one breath and the next, and notice that the soul lives in this living interval, in this space that does not need to be filled. When fear arises, recognize it as an ancient guardian and continue, because the soul appears just beyond the edge of fear. Feel the contact of the body with the ground and perceive the soul as something rooted, present, embodied, not distant or abstract. Now bring attention to any subtle sensation in the chest and remain there, because the soul speaks softly and requires attentive listening. If the urge to cry comes, do not hold it back, because the soul cleanses itself when it finds permission to move through old emotion. Notice how tension begins to soften when you do not try to control it, and realize that the soul reorganizes without effort. Bring to awareness the simple fact of being here now and recognize this as the direct doorway to the soul, always open. When thoughts about the past or future arise, return to the feeling of the body, because the soul lives only in the present. Now make an inner gesture of welcoming, as if you were embracing yourself from within, and feel how the soul responds with steady gentleness. Observe how time seems to slow down when the soul takes space, creating a rhythm that is more human and more true. If the mind says this is not enough, continue, because the soul reveals itself exactly where the ego gives up. Feel the entire body as a field of living perception and recognize the soul permeating every sensation. Now allow the silence to deepen without trying to hold it, because the soul shows itself when you do not interrupt. When urgency diminishes, recognize this as a sign of inner alignment, not as a loss of motivation. Bring your attention back to the chest again and feel the soul as constant presence, not as a passing event. If confusion arises, stay, because the soul moves through confusion without getting lost. Notice how the breath becomes deeper on its own when the soul is recognized. Now say inwardly, I stay with myself, and feel the soul's immediate response as stable presence. Remain feeling even when nothing seems to be happening, because the soul works in silence. Recognize the simplicity of this meeting as something rare and precious, because few choose to feel instead of flee. Now rest in this nameless state without expectation, because the soul does not ask for conclusion. Observe how something in you organizes itself when the soul takes the center, bringing clarity without effort. When thoughts return, thank them and return to feeling, strengthening intimacy with the soul. Feel the quiet firmness that arises when you remain and recognize this as a sign of real meeting. Now stay a little longer, because the soul continues to reveal itself as long as you choose not to abandon yourself. And as you remain here, something within you keeps calling softly, not to end, but to deepen even further this living contact with your own soul, now, in this exact instant. Rumi speaks to you now as one who calls you by your most intimate name, because the soul responds when it is recognized, and the practice begins the moment you decide to stop abandoning yourself and remain whole here, feeling what pulses in the chest without translating it into thought, without running anywhere. Now look inward with simple honesty and feel the soul as a living presence, not as an idea, not as a belief, but as something that perceives before the mind speaks, and allow this perceiving to spread through the body like a subtle warmth that asks for no explanation. Do this. Relax the jaw, release the shoulders, and let the weight of the body fall where it is, because the soul likes to land when the body stops fighting the moment, and this silent landing is already a real meeting. When thoughts try to pull you outward, notice them and return to the feeling in the chest, like returning home, because each return strengthens the listening of the soul and weakens the old habit of living only in the head. If a tightness or a stored emotion arises, do not close. Let the soul touch that place with firm care, because feeling all the way through is the most direct way to release what has been held for years of escape. Now bring attention to the breath and feel how the soul moves with the air, coming in and going out without effort, without command, showing that life happens in you even when you do not try to control it. Rumi taught that truth lives in the heart. So bring your listening to this center and stay there, even when it seems too simple, because the soul reveals itself in the simplicity the ego despises. Notice how the body responds when you allow yourself to stay, how tension begins to soften, and realize this is not ordinary relaxation. It is the soul being recognized and welcomed without demands. If sadness comes, do not turn it into a story. Simply feel it as energy moving through, because the soul does not want explanation. It wants space to pass and to show itself without a mask. Now say inwardly with sincere intention, I am here, and feel how the soul responds with immediate presence, like a silent echo that has always been waiting for this call. You may notice a silence appearing between thoughts, and in this interval the soul becomes clear as a stable ground, not as a strong emotion but as a quiet certainty of being alive. Rumi spoke of remembering because the soul is not created, it is remembered, and now you remember when you stop seeking experiences and allow the real to present itself in the now. Bring attention to any subtle sensation in the chest, a warmth, an expansion, a weight, and stay with it without naming, because the soul communicates in sensations that need no label. If fear arises, recognize it as an ancient guardian and remain present, because the soul does not fear being felt. What fears is the character that lives by control. Now feel the contact of the body with the ground and notice how the soul likes foundation, stability, concrete truth, not spiritual abstraction. Rumi became an authority because he lived this dive without return, and when you practice this honest staying, you step on the same inner ground he pointed to with simple, direct words. Remain feeling, even when nothing special seems to happen, because the soul does not manifest in fireworks, but in silent constancy that transforms from within. Notice how time seems to slow when you do not run, and in this space the soul recognizes itself as continuous presence, not as something that comes and goes. Now ask without words, what does my soul need now, and wait to feel the answer in the body, not in the mind, because the answer always comes as clear sensation. Each time you return to feeling, you reaffirm the soul as center, and this repetition creates real intimacy with yourself, dissolving the distance created by years of distraction. Rumi pointed out that true love is born when the force falls away, and here the force falls when you choose to feel instead of explain, to stay instead of flee. Notice how something in you organizes itself on its own when you do not interfere, as if the soul takes the helm and guides with gentle firmness. Now stay a little longer in this nameless contact without conclusion, because the deep meeting does not close, it deepens, and as you remain, the soul continues to call, to open, to reveal something that asks for no ending, only living continuity in the now. Rumi speaks to you now not as someone distant, but as one who holds your face and asks for total attention, because this meeting is not tomorrow, not later. It is now. And the practice begins when you stop postponing yourself and accept feeling what is alive in this exact instant, without excuse, without escape. Now do this with me. Stop adjusting the body, stop seeking comfort, and simply feel where there is tension, not to relax but to recognize, because the soul begins to appear when you stop rejecting discomfort and allow it to exist without resistance. Feel the chest again, but now more deeply, as if you were entering a forgotten room within yourself, and do not try to change what you find there. Just observe, because observing without judgment is the most direct gesture of love the ego does not know how to make. You will notice a voice saying, this is nonsense, this won't work, and that voice is not you, it is the fear of losing control. So the practice is to hear this voice and not obey, to stay a little longer, because staying is what dismantles the lie. Rumi insisted that those who flee their own pain never find real love. So now, if emotional pain, tightness, weight, or emptiness arises, do not move, do not distract yourself. Let it pass through, because passing through is different from suffering. Passing through is allowing passage. Now bring attention to the breath without controlling it. Simply observe the air coming in and going out, and notice something essential. You are being breathed, life is happening in you, and this simple perception begins to dissolve the idea of a separate I. Speak inwardly without sound, purely as intention. I stop running now, and feel the impact of this in the body, because true decisions do not remain in the mind, they reverberate in the chest, in the stomach, in the breath. You may feel fear of going too deep, of losing something, of dissolving, and this fear is the ego's last guardian. So the practice is not to fight it, just recognize it and remain present, because fear exists only while you believe you are it. Rumi did not teach improving the ego, he taught crossing it. And now crossing means remaining feeling without creating narrative, without telling a story, without explaining what is happening, just feeling like someone who finally accepts naked truth. Notice how thoughts arise trying to define the experience, and every time this happens, return to the most obvious physical sensation. The weight of the body, the contact with the ground, the movement of the chest, because the soul recognizes itself in the concrete, not in the abstract. Now allow silence to appear between one thought and another, even if briefly, and notice how this silence is not empty. It is alive, stable, and asks for nothing, and this silence is the ground of the soul. Rumi spoke of the heart as the dwelling of the real, So the practice is to inhabit this space by feeling without hurry, because hurry is always escape, and staying without hurry is a radical act in a world that taught you to run from yourself. If intense emotion arises, the urge to cry, to close the chest, to defend, do not block it. Let it come, because emotion that finds space transforms, and emotion that is repressed becomes constant noise that prevents you from hearing the soul. Now notice something subtle. The less you try to make something happen, the more something happens, because the soul does not respond to effort. It responds to surrender, and surrender here is not giving up, it is absolute honesty. Rumi became an authority because he lived this surrender to the end, losing identities, certainties, images, and that is why his words still pass through centuries, because the soul recognizes those who speak from it. Bring attention back to the chest and ask without words, what in me is alive now? And do not wait for a mental answer, wait for sensation, because the soul responds in sensation, in warmth, in presence, in silence. You may feel a strange familiarity, as if you were meeting yourself again after a long time, and this recognition is the clearest sign that the meeting is happening, even if the ego tries to minimize it. The practice is to repeat this inner gesture whenever you get lost. Feel, remain, return, because each return is a silent affirmation of truth against years of self-abandonment. Rumi said that what you seek is seeking you. And now this reveals itself as an intimate meeting with yourself, not mystical, not distant, but simple, direct, human, present. Notice how the body begins to trust when you do not force it, how the breath deepens on its own, how something aligns without command, because the soul organizes when the ego steps aside. Now stay a little longer in this nameless state, without expectation, without wanting to conclude anything, because the deep meeting is not an ending. It is a continuous opening, a portal that remains open as long as you do not flee. And as you remain here, feeling present, honest, something continues to call softly from within, like a living question that does not want a quick answer, only space to keep revealing itself. What changes in your life when you decide never to abandon yourself again? Rumi speaks to you now not as a man of the past, but as someone who has already crossed exactly the point where you are, and for that reason the practice begins now. Pause for a moment and feel the weight of your body where you are. Feel your feet, your hands, your chest, because the meeting with the soul begins when you descend from the head into the body and realize you have always been absent from yourself. Now stay with me and do something simple and profound. Bring your attention to the center of the chest and remain there, imagining nothing, just feeling, even if at first you feel almost nothing, because the soul does not respond to haste, it responds to staying, and this simple gesture already begins to break the old habit of living only in the mind. You will notice thoughts arising, commentary, distractions, and the practice is not to fight them, but to notice and return. Notice and return, as Rumi always pointed to when he spoke of returning to the heart, because each return weakens the ego that lives by pulling you away from feeling. If tightness, anguish, or a strange emptiness arises, do not be afraid, do not change anything. Stay, because this discomfort is the first real contact with parts of you that have gone too long unfelt, and the soul begins to appear exactly when you stop anesthetizing yourself. Now allow the breath to be natural and observe how the chest moves on its own, without your control, and feel this as a clear sign. Life happens in you without your effort, and recognizing this dissolves the illusion of control that has always kept you from the deep meeting. Rumi insisted that true love begins when you stop defending yourself, so the emotional practice is to stop explaining yourself inwardly, stop justifying what you feel, and simply feel raw, direct, unfiltered, like someone who finally stops lying to themselves. Speak to yourself in silence now, not with words but with attention. I am here, and feel the impact of this in the body, because perhaps this is the first time in a long while that you are truly present with yourself, without doing, without seeking, without waiting for something to happen. You may feel the urge to move, to pick up your phone, to leave this state, and this urge is the ego asking for escape. So the practice is to stay a little longer, just a little longer, because each second of remaining creates a space where the soul can breathe. Rumi did not teach complicated techniques. He pointed to the simple truth of being whole, and now this means feeling what is here, fatigue, sadness, emptiness, or silence, without trying to turn it into something beautiful or spiritual. Observe now how the body reacts when you do not interfere, how emotion comes and goes, how silence appears between thoughts, and notice that within this silent space there is something stable, something that does not agitate, something that has always been here. The practice of deep meeting is to recognize this silent ground while everything passes, because this is not thought, not emotion, it is presence. And the soul recognizes itself in this nameless, formless, wordless place. You do not need to believe anything that is being said, only to feel, because Rumi never asked for belief. He pointed to direct experience, and the experience now is this intimate contact with yourself that does not depend on ideas. If strong emotion comes, let it come. Let it pass through. Do not hold it. Do not repress it. because emotion felt all the way through dissolves, and each dissolution opens more inner space for the soul to manifest. Notice how the simple act of remaining subtly changes something, as if you were coming home after a long time away, and this sense of deep familiarity is the clearest sign that the meeting is happening. Rumi spoke of remembering because the soul is not something new, it is something forgotten. And now, by feeling without fleeing, you begin to remember without effort, without technique, without false promise. The practice is brutally honest. Whenever you get lost, return to feeling, to the chest, to the body, and do this again and again, because constancy is what dismantles the ego and reveals what is essential. You may feel fear of this contact, because the ego fears disappearing, but the soul has no fear. It only waits, and when you stay, it appears as a simple, stable, silent presence. Rumi became an authority because he lived this total surrender, and his words carry this embodied truth, not as theory, but as someone who died to the false and was born into the real. Now observe how something in you begins to relax when you do not try to be anything, do not try to improve, do not try to awaken, when you simply are, because the deep meeting happens when the search ends. You begin to realize that the love Rumi speaks of is not intense emotion. It is this profound acceptance of being here whole, without inner division, without war with yourself. And when you touch this state, even for moments, something in you knows that this is more real than any thought, more true than any story, and the question that opens, without immediate answer, continues to pulse within you. What happens if you stop running from this meeting and begin to live from it now? Rumi does not speak to calm you, he speaks to pass through you. And when you truly listen, something in you begins to fall without warning, because the soul recognizes truth before the mind tries to defend itself. And the meeting begins exactly there, when you stop explaining yourself to yourself and simply remain, feeling what has always been there, ignored, suffocated, pushed to the background. The deep meeting with your own soul begins when you stop acting as if you are in control, because control is the ego's last addiction. And the real practice is simple and demanding, to stay present when everything in you wants to run away, because running has always been the way you found not to feel what hurts, and Rumi points directly to that sensitive place without asking permission. You listen and something tightens in the chest, the breath changes, the body reacts, and this is the clearest sign that this is not pretty poetry, it is truth touching what you spent a lifetime avoiding. And the practice is not to interrupt this contact, not to distract yourself, not to rationalize, because every attempt to understand is a disguised escape. Sufism has always taught that the soul does not shout, it whispers, and that is why you never heard it amid the noise of the mind. The real emotional practice is to create inner silence by becoming still on the inside, even when thoughts arise, even when anxiety tries to pull you away. You do not need to do anything beyond feeling the body, feeling the weight in the chest, feeling the vibration of the voice passing through you, because the meeting happens when attention leaves the head and descends into feeling, and this simple movement dismantles years of identification with thoughts that were never you. Rumi does not offer techniques. He offers truth, and truth does not ask for effort. It asks for surrender. The practice is to stop seeking spiritual experiences and allow the raw experience of being alive to reveal itself without filter, without makeup, without a beautiful narrative. When emptiness appears, you usually run, but here you stay. Because this emptiness is not absence, it is space. And it is in this space that the soul begins to breathe again, like someone who was locked away for a long time and finally finds air. The deep meeting happens when you accept feeling ancient sadness without turning it into a story, when you accept fear without justifying it, when you accept silence without filling it, because the soul shows itself when there is no more interference from the character you created to survive. Rumi speaks of love, but not comfortable love. He speaks of the love that burns, that dissolves, that removes what is false. And the emotional practice is to allow this fire to work without trying to extinguish it with distractions, beliefs, or explanations. You realize that you always tried to improve yourself when in truth you needed to undress. And this undressing hurts because it involves losing images, losing certainties, losing the idea of who you thought you were. And it is exactly there that the meeting deepens. The practice is insistent. Whenever you get lost in thought, you return to feeling, to the body, to presence. And this constant return creates a crack in the ego which cannot survive without continuous attention. Sufism calls this remembering, because it is not about acquiring something new, it is about recalling what was forgotten. And Rumi guides this remembering relentlessly, showing that everything you seek outside is an attempt not to look within. You begin to realize that the soul does not need to be reached, it needs to be allowed. And the emotional practice is to stop pushing yourself forward and finally stay where you are, feeling what is alive now. When emotion comes strongly, you do not analyze, you do not explain, you feel it all the way through. Because emotion that is felt dissolves. Emotion that is avoided becomes a prison. and Rumi always pointed to this radical honesty with yourself. The deep meeting does not happen in constant ecstasy. It happens in continuous presence, in staying when there is no immediate reward, when there is no beautiful sensation, when there is only you and what is happening inside. Rumi's authority comes exactly from this. He did not offer easy paths. He lived the dissolution of the ego in his own flesh, and his words carry this real weight that the soul recognizes without needing to believe. The practice is simple and uncomfortable. Listen, feel, remain, repeat. And each time you do this, something silently reorganizes as if parts of you begin to align without effort. You begin to see that the greatest obstacle was never the world. It was the layers you created not to feel. And the meeting with the soul is the moment when those layers begin to fall one by one. Rumi insists that true love begins where the I ends, and the emotional practice is to observe this I trying to appear, trying to comment, trying to assert itself, and not feed it with attention. The more you remain, the simpler everything becomes, and this simplicity frightens the ego, but it is the soul's natural ground, where there is no inner conflict, only living silent presence. And when this meeting begins to happen, even subtly, something in you knows there is no turning back, because you have tasted, even for an instant, what it is to be whole, without mask, without escape, without separation. If you felt something move inside, even subtly, this was not passing emotion, it was the soul recognizing itself. This meeting does not happen because you learned something new. It happens because you stopped running. The greatest mistake now would be to return to the automatic, to noise, to distraction. Return to this video whenever you feel you are losing yourself. Each listening deepens the meeting. Write in the comments a single word that describes what your soul felt. Do not explain, just name it. If you feel this content speaks directly to something intimate in you, subscribe. This channel is not for the curious, it is for those who are ready to remain in the meeting.